Basically, I mean a leader who doesn't really possess empathy and who doesn't have consciousness in the sense of not feeling remorse. And it's hard for us as healthy human beings to think that about other people, especially people who we collaborate with or who are our bosses or employees, or that there are moments where we actually feel connected to that person and like that person. But nevertheless, we know that there are a certain percentage of people who don't have the ability to feel remorse, nor have empathy for other people, whether we like to think it about them or not. And that is the people I'm referring to when I call them a selfish leader.
And we're live for another episode of Being Human. Delighted to say I'm here for a second time. Returnee to the show, Josefine Campbell. Delighted to have you here. You are a 4-time ju-jitsu champion. I've got to get that in first because I do ju-jitsu and that immediately makes me enamored by you. The first time you were on the show, you talked about the power barometer. Manage your personal energy for business success. And we talked about that. You're back with a new book. This one is called 12 Tools for Managing a Selfish Leader, Unlocking Authenticity for Resilience. So I'm delighted to have you back to discuss your tale of how to deal with a selfish leader packed with tools, as the title suggests. So yeah, very excited to have you back on, and congratulations on the new book, Josephine.
Thank you, Richard. I'm also very delighted to be back. And I've been looking forward to this conversation since we had such a great conversation last time.
Yeah.
This is really like a moment that I've been looking forward to. And I expect that it's going to be as enriching as my last conversation with you. So,
great.
Yeah, happy
Good.
to be here.
Yes, let's set that in intention for the conversation and to enrich our listeners and viewers. Okay, so a selfish leader. Maybe we should start with what do you mean by a selfish leader?
Well, I wanted to bring what we are talking about here down to earth in a way that everybody can relate to it. Sometimes if you use bigger words, it's going to be harder to see yourself in this situation. Basically, I mean a leader who doesn't really possess empathy and who doesn't have consciousness in the sense of not feeling remorse. And it's hard for us as healthy human beings to think that about other people, especially people who we collaborate with or who are our bosses or employees, or that there are moments where we actually feel connected to that person and like that person. But nevertheless, we know that there are a certain percentage of people who don't have the ability to feel remorse, nor have empathy for other people, whether we like to think it about them or not. And that is the people I'm referring to when I call them a selfish leader. It has other words as well for it.
Right. And
there are other words for it.
So when you describe it, I immediately go to psychopath or sociopath. Is that what you mean, or is it something different?
Well, it is what I mean. Yeah.
Right.
Because they're very much there. And the psychiatrists say that it's between 3 to 4% of all human beings in the world who are within this category. Well, the psychopath, not the sociopaths, they're more. And then I digged into the research on the topic, and I found that almost all the research is scientifically is done on research on psychopathic criminals. And then there's a lot of assumptions based on that, on how psychopathic leaders are. And most of the scientific research which is done on psychopathic leaders are 1 case studies that are done retrospectively. So, science is really thin on this topic. It's very not so studied, not so covered. There's some practical challenges in how you actually want to create the study. Are you going to walk into a multinational corporation and say, hello, who want to sign up for this study that I'm doing?
Right.
So it's going to be hard. But in my work as a coach, I come across it quite often, too often. So that's also why I'm thinking, the numbers are bigger than what we think. And the story about Marie that you can read about in the book, it's a real story. It's based on a real story, but it's told as fiction. And for the reader to be able to identify or enjoy the storytelling and be captured with Marie's amazing experience. And I thought what she did was so brave and inspiring that it was worthwhile sharing to other people. She wanted to share her story to help other people. She's a very wholehearted person. And as a leader, she's also known for being someone who really embraced everybody, who developed other people, where people feel cared for. She's a wonderful human being. So she also wanted other people to learn from her experiences on how to deal with it, because she did it so well. And you can actually deal with it if you're in the right circumstances. Marie, she has a really wonderful husband. And it's not like she has two toddlers that she also has to take care of. She has she has two kids, but they're pretty big. So her life, and she has a lot of support from friends and family. So she's in a very resilient situation in her personal life also. So she has something to fall back on, because this is not something I would advise everybody to go for what she went for. But she made the decision that she was not going to leave her job because she had a selfish leader, Martin, as we have named him in the book. Once again, she would not leave a job because of a selfish leader. And I thought it was interesting because I find that most people who have reached the level of vice president, one way or the other, they have found a way to deal with leaders who are selfish or have dark traits. Because otherwise, they wouldn't have gotten to where they are, and they wouldn't be able to be in their job. So unfortunately, it's a part of corporate work life today. I hope that one day in the future, it's not going to be like that. But it is, as it is now. And we have to start talking about it, because otherwise it's going to stay the same.
Yeah. Yeah. And if selfish leader includes the class which we say are psychopaths, and that's 3 to 4% of the population, do you have any stats on what percentage of senior executives in corporations tend to be in your category of selfish, which might include sociopath and psychopathy? Yeah, could you just get a sense of how big this is as an issue?
Yeah, well, this is not in the book. This is some of my research that I did before writing the book, right? Because I didn't write a book about psychopath. I wrote a book about Marie's journey and how Marie dealt with it. But what I found is that there's, as I said before, there's not a lot of substantial research, and it's impossible to count the numbers. There are some guessing, there are some assumptions, which are like 10%.
Right. Yeah.
Guessings.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and certainly I think most people who've been in corporate life for a while will have this is again a guess, but my assertion would be most people in corporate life has come across at least one leader with these type of traits. And I think I'd read research before that the more senior in the organization, the higher the overrepresentation of, I think this was on psychopaths that I'd read.
Yeah. And if it's, if you look into the category of leaders who also own the company, it puts them into a position where they can let those traits take more space in their personality, less interrupted for a longer time, because they're in a very powerful position. You can also look into industries such as the media industry, which offers a lot of personal exposure, police force, where you have power over other people. There are some industries where there are some assumptions that you would have a larger percentage of people. And I think, and sorry guys, because I love working with IT companies, but I think that from my experience, the percentage might be a little larger in IT heavy firms, IT corporations, because in most of them, the culture is very on the topic, not so much on the people. So where you have a culture which is not so much about people, but more about the machinery, then behaviors like that can prevail for a longer time.
Okay.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. It does make sense. Which, well, immediately where I went with it is some of the research on male versus female orientation, and there tends to be a little bit more orientation towards things for men and a little bit more orientation. Of course, this is all just in the averages, but and a little more orientation towards people for women.
Well, I think that's very interesting you're bringing it up, because in the orientation towards women, it's even less described and researched.
Right.
Like, so it's in one of my favorite books about the topic, written by Babiak, and they had, it's 100, 250, 300 pages, something like that. And there's 1.5 page about the female version of psychopath.
Oh, right. Okay.
And very often, it shows in a different way than the traits we know from the very masculine psychopath.
Okay.
And what they also describe, which I also see quite often in practice, is that it will come out in a way where they would make everybody feel pity for them. They always are unlucky. Oh, they had a tough childhood. Oh, well, now they didn't. Oh, everybody are against them. Oh, I just lost my this. I just lost my that. So they would manipulate with people around them in a different way. Not by intimidation, but by making other people feel sorry for them.
Okay. But
not all of them, but a large percentage. And it's so difficult to see through.
Okay.
Because very few people have written that 1.5 page. Remember that.
Right. Yeah.
But it's something I see quite often.
Okay. So with that then, because where I was going with in terms of the IT culture was, and you were saying it tends to be a culture more oriented around things. I was saying, well, by extension, then do we tend to find more selfish leaders in male-dominated cultures, or not?
I would say I would actually cut the cake in a different way. I would say the more mature a company is, the less they are. So, for example, I work a lot with Novo Nordisk, the pharmaceutical company. It's a quite mature company, which have invested in leadership development over decades. And what is remarkable is that the CEOs have built on top of each other's work, rather than writing out what the previous person was doing, trying to set the mark. They are respectfully building on top of each other's work. And the company has a value-based approach to leadership, where people actually live the leadership principles. You know, they have the leadership principles under their skin for real. And of course, you will find people with dark traits and bad behavior there. And I also know about bad leaders in that company, but I do think that there are less. And I do also think that the culture is so mature there. So a lot of people will not put up with bad behavior. They're very good at aligning. They are trying to be respectful for each other. And then, of course, it happens, especially the higher you get, it can happen. But the higher you get in the hierarchy, that's what I'm referring to. But I think there's a lot of people there who just don't want to put up with it. And it's so embedded in the culture to be respectful for each other. So they'll have a harder time there. It's also a company that has a lot of processes. And where there's a lot of processes and a lot of transparency, it's harder to manipulate.
Yeah.
So let's say you have a scale-up company. There's a lot of growth. There's a lot of lack of processes, a lot of chaos. It's the perfect place for someone selfish to manipulate.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
reality distort.
Yes. It reminds me actually a family member that made that observation, moving from a very small firm to a much larger firm. He actually found it a lot less. He was relieved to get into the much larger firm because there was just far less tolerance for the kind of behaviors that he'd been experienced in the smaller firm. So that makes sense from that example. But anyway, so but we sort of had a bit of a diversion there because I was just interested to get your sense of the size of the problem. But back to Marie then. So she makes the bold choice to stick with it, right? She doesn't quit. And what are some of the ways in which she is able to address the behavior of Martin, the selfish leader?
Yeah, so the first thing she has to do is actually addressing herself.
Right.
Making sure that she recharges her batteries, her personal batteries, so she has enough energy to be resilient. So she has to really set some personal boundaries in a way where she will not be manipulated. She will have to prioritize some routines that fills her up in her personal energy. She took up meditation. Normally when I coach people who are in such a stressed state of mind as Marie was when I just met her, I wouldn't introduce meditation at that point of time. I would just, try and see if I can help them recharge a little bit with things that are already known to them. But she stood out and she really took up meditation right away. And she's still doing it this day to day. And she would just do 10 minutes every morning. And it worked for her. She has a background where religion has been part of her life when she grew up. So the concept of moving inward to her inner space was familiar for her. So in that sense, it was not that deal to her. And meditation doesn't have to be religious. Well, it's not religious at all. It's about just turning your attention to what happens inside you and being fully present. So that's one of the things she did, and that worked for her. Going for walks, being aware of what really charges your energy, your personal energy, and making those choices. And then Martin, direct manager, he would constantly trying to step over her personal boundaries in many different ways. Also by having ambitions on her behalf, ambitions that she didn't want. Correcting her, gaslighting her, creating bad atmosphere at the meetings, calling her out. And he's a very well-spoken person. He's super smart. And she felt that she couldn't really communicate what she wanted to communicate when she's together with him because he's so fast. And in a personality test, she would come out as introverted. She needs a little time to think before she answers. And he took advantage of that. So she would design ways of, we would design ways of, for her to avoid being captured in these situations. So, for example, for her annual performance review, that yearly meeting where you discuss how well did you do last year? Should you get your bonus? Are you going to get a raise? Are you going to get promoted or not? Instead of having one meeting of 1 hour, she asked him, can we have 30 minutes and I'll just listen to everything you have to say And then the next day we have a 30 minutes meeting, and then I will answer you back because then you have time to think. And he said yes. So that was a way of managing that situation.
Right.
And a way of managing that the data would not get manipulated was by, with her very good attention to detail, to put everything into Excel sheets and records and share it with everybody. Of course, it's a lot of extra work, but that way he couldn't continue manipulating with the data and questioning whether she had done this or that, because it was there in the system and it had been shared with people throughout the whole time.
Right. And your subtitle is Unlocking Authenticity for Resilience. So talk to me about how authenticity plays a role here then.
Yeah. So there's something which is really you. There's something that you have become throughout your life experience. And if we go deeper, there might be something which was you all throughout the whole time. You have children too, right?
Yes.
And it's so funny that you can see that your children, they are somehow part of you and your partner. But there's also something which is just them.
Yes.
Even when they're very small, there's something which is that person.
Yes.
And that's, might be the core of who we are.
Yeah.
Deep down. And rediscovering who you are in your essence, coming down to what you really are about. And that could be, going all the way down to the essence and focusing on that. But it could also looking at what have you become and which part of you do you want to bring with you moving forward and which part do you not want to bring with you forward. But who are you really and what matters to you? So one of the things we did to strengthen Marie's authenticity for resilience was identifying her top 3 values. This thing with core values that, of course, you're in a corporate work life or in a real life or in a relationship, you have to compromise a little bit. With your core values, you cannot compromise them over time continuously, like for too long. That will make you sick. So for the things which are most dear to you, such as for Marie, one of them is responsibility. You just have to stand up for it at a certain point. You can't keep on compromising it. And then you can compromise on other things.
Right.
But you need to know what those core values are to be really true to yourself. Unless you do it by heart.
Yeah. Yeah. So so she defines her core values and then you stand up for them. But is it simply about getting present to them and writing them down and getting clear on them? Is that the fuel, or is there anything beyond that helps her then assert them in this case, in the context of dealing with Martin?
Well, the first step is identifying the core values. And we have some exercises we do to prompt the thinking about what the core values really are.
Yeah, and in the book you've got a big list, haven't you?
Yeah. So if the reader want to identify their core values, there should be a little bit of help there. Because I really want this book also to help. Well, the reason why we wrote this book is that we want people who are in a similar position as Marie to have a go-to place and some support from the book with some tools also on how to deal with their situation. And then you use the core values as you move forward. Being aware of when you're overstepping your personal boundaries is the first step. It's not like you have to be super squared and say, oh, now you overstep my boundaries, or you're totally not flexible anymore. It's not like that. But once you're aware of it, you can make healthy choices. So you can try to avoid those situations that you know are really eating you up from inside because they're compromising your core values. And sometimes there's a lot of chaos in life, and it's not apparent whether you should go right or left, but looking to your core values, we call it like a North Star or a lighthouse of values, then it'll be more clear whether you should go right or left. Because as I always say, even though it's not, that light is not just going to be easy, if you follow the direction of your North Star, of your lighthouse of values, somehow it's going to take you in the right direction. And you're going to end up somewhere which is aligned with who you are and what is the best situation for you to be in.
Right. Yes. And this exercise, helped her to stand up to Martin. And then was it about you working with her? Because I've done this when I've had coaching clients, and I don't know if this has helped in this situation, but sometimes role playing or rehearsing, how she might then assert her values. Was that part of the process?
No, I don't do so many role plays. And we don't try to preempt situations so often. Well, sometimes, like the annual performance radio, we do.
Yeah.
But it's more about the circumstances. It's more like equipping her with a tool that she can carry with her. And then when she is in a situation where she can feel this is wrong somehow, she's then equipped to quickly analyze it. And she has a set of tools that she can use to correct the situation. So one thing, I'll give you another example of a tool. One thing that Martin would do very often is to make her feel powerless.
Right.
It could really be intimidating. So there is some research done at Howard University that shows that if you stand with your arms over your head
the power
for
pose.
2 minutes, the power poses, it's going to change your chemistry, your neurological chemistry. It's going to start you're going to start producing testosterone, which is going to make you feel stronger and more ready for the challenge. So when she had a meeting with Martin, she would schedule 10, 15 minutes before the meeting for a break. She would go to the bathroom, and she still does this. She says sometimes, like now she doesn't work with Martin anymore, but she will still use this. She'll go to the bathroom, and she will stand inside, right next to the toilet, with her hands over her head for 2 minutes to boost her hormones, to feel more empowered before entering the meeting, so that he wouldn't intimidate her so much.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I love that. Well, this is great because I'd read about power poses before, and I've tried them out a bit for fun, but this is a great example of a real practical application of using them in this situation. And what I like here is that it's a great example of how sometimes the right decision is to move out of in this, you might call it a toxic relationship or a relationship that's causing you, harm in some way. And sometimes it is better to stay.
Yeah.
And
certainly.
use it as like a training ground, right? I've experienced that in life. Yeah.
Do you want to share?
No. Oh, well, I've had it with family members, right? Like there's a school of thought that, if you've got like, quote, toxic family members, then, a way to manage your life is to manage your boundaries. And that can be part of it as well. And to be very clear about who you're going to have in your life, right? And who you're not, because people are like energy sinks or energy boosters. And that sort of whole school of thought, which is around like you manage your life by managing your boundaries and who's in your life. And I think there is some validity in all of that. And I think it's also true, you could do that to a pathological state where it actually harms you because you're not exposing yourself to the challenge of being around people who do trigger you. Because when you do put yourself in that situation and you learn to deal with your triggers and you learn to assert yourself around those people, the growth is enormous.
Yes. And that's what the story of Marie is about. Because she learns how to deal with her triggers.
Mm.
And she learns what are her weak spots that Martin is using for manipulation. And she has to deal with her traumas and her past and her, for example, she has a tendency of taking over responsibility. And as you can read in the book, there's a very good reason for why she does that. Something to do with her childhood. At some point, we have to go revisit that, and she has to do some trauma healing, and she deals with why it is she always takes over responsibility. She cares for people for real, and then she takes over responsibility. So Martin would use that to manipulate her. But she has to understand why it's so painful for her.
Yeah.
So she can free herself a little bit. One thing is work relationships. Of course, you can quit your job, but then again, there would be times where people make choices like Marie's and say, I'm not going to keep on quitting because I keep bumping into these people. I'm going to learn how to deal with it. And I think it's when people feel strong enough and resilient enough like Marie to do that, I think it's good because we need more of those people rather than the others in the corporations for the whole, for the sake of the whole, right? Another thing is in a family, of course, you can choose to cut the contact, but we all know that it's difficult to cut your mother or father out of your life, no matter how horrible they've been with you. It's in a lot of cases, it's healthier for people to learn how to deal with it, understand how they trigger them, and manage that, because it's also painful having cut out your mother and father. And of course, it all depends on the particular situation, but there are some parallels, right?
Yes. I totally agree with you. And I think everybody has to make their own choice. And it also doesn't have to be an all or nothing. You could titrate it, right? You could allow yourself a bit of exposure and then build up the exposure over time as you become more resilient and more assertive around that person. Yeah. So,
and you practice being with that person who triggers you or manipulates you or makes you feel this and that. And you find out how to be resilient to that by being super authentic, standing on your core values, knowing your boundaries, and being able to feel what is going on so you can manage it. So because it's so uncomfortable, what most people would do is they would stop feeling.
Yeah.
You would stop sensing what happens in your body. You would stop feeling the emotions because it's just so uncomfortable. It's a natural reaction. But the brave choice that Marie made was to feel it.
Yeah.
Because those feelings and those reactions are guiding you. They're telling you what your triggers are. What are these soft, weak points that Martin sees that you would just squeeze them, right? And if you're not aware of which ones they are, you can't reinforce them. You can't deal with them yourself. So it's very much about managing yourself and being authentic. So you are more, so that it's more difficult to manipulate you.
Yeah. That's so true, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you get to a place where you can be exposed to a selfish person attempting to manipulate you, and you can allow yourself to feel how that person triggers you and makes you feel, and still stand in your ground and still share your truth, you become unstoppable.
Exactly, unstoppable.
Yeah. I think it's a great point you're making, and it reminds me of a meme I saw recently where it had so you do your breath work, you do your red light therapy, you do your yoga, you do this, you do this, you do this. Have you ever just stopped and tried feeling your feelings? There's so much truth to that. There's so much power in just stopping and feeling your feelings.
Yeah.
So as she changed, Did Martin change?
No, not much. But he changed his behavior towards her. It's not so much fun manipulating someone who is not easily manipulated.
Yeah.
So he, by default, will move his antennas and his manipulation towards a better target for him. You know that violators, they have this sixth sense for who could be easier to manipulate or attack than another person. They even done studies on rapists, on looking at a movie where you have some different women walking on the street, and the scientists, they ask them, which one are you going to attack? And they would be less inclined to pick the women who look self-assured.
Right.
So they have this sensor for who can I, who is easier to manipulate. And that being said, I know plenty of strong, resilient, super smart, very senior executives, some of them even in Mensa, like that smart, who have been manipulated by people who are selfish or who have dark traits. So just because they were in the way. So it can happen to anybody. So that's why you shouldn't feel ashamed. And very often, when we're in that moment where someone realizes, for example, a CEO realizes that he or her, or them or they, have been manipulated by an employee. And the minute where they understand what has been going on, they feel so ashamed. It's so painful for them. They feel so stupid. And if anybody of you who are listening here feels like that or in that position, then I'm gonna tell, I know people who are so smart to whom this happens. So it can happen to anybody. It's a violation. And that's why you people feel so ashamed. It is a violation.
Yeah. No, that's a very important point to make, is that, yeah. And I can think of two people in my life, both men, interestingly enough, both bullied by other men in the workplace. And they've both shared about that. And both in no judgment on them, but in both cases, they moved, either in one case moved companies, in another case moved departments to avoid it, which absolutely is the right choice in many cases.
In many cases, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And in many cases, it's also good to, as is the case with Marie, to stop and use it as the opportunity to do the work. Yeah. I also think you make an important point that Martin didn't change, because that's very often, as much as, and I fall into this, I have fallen into this several times in my life, is, because I'm doing work on myself and I'm changing and I'm using the dynamic to allow myself to change. And I'm like, but why can't you change too? Like, I'm changing. Surely you should be changing too. And it's just, that's not a good, it's not, it's not useful to take that orientation, right? I think it's got to be, you've got to have a basic assumption is people don't change. I think that's a pretty good assumption.
Yeah. And that's also why the book is about Marie. It's not about Martin. Martin is just the violator. We're not trying to explain Martin or give the stats about how many people like Martin there are out there. We can do that here in the podcast. But in the book, it's about Marie's journey and how she manages the situation and how she builds her resilience through increased authenticity, something that is worthwhile digging into for everybody, whether they have a selfish manager or not.
Yes. But the selfish manager can give you that immediate motivation, I suppose, right? If you stay with it. Yeah.
Yeah, because you're in pain. And some people, most people, they need pain to start a journey.
Yeah.
To do something differently than what they're used to. And then there is a small percentage of very, very smart, self-motivated people who will do development journeys just to enrich themselves, not because they're in pain.
Yeah.
But that's not most people. Most
No.
people do it because they're in pain, they want to solve something.
Yes. Certainly been I would have never done any self-work if I had not been in pain. I'm definitely not of the category of people who would have just done it anyway. That's for sure. Yeah. The other question I had was around, organizations and accommodation for selfish leaders. Because I had somebody else on the podcast whose father was he's an Oxford University academic. His father was a psychopath. He's not as far along the psychopathy spectrum, but himself has psychopathic traits. And he wrote a book called The Wisdom of Psychopaths. And it was one of the videos on YouTube I got the most sort of heat for. How could you be saying this, Richard? How could you have this guy on? But he made some great points, in terms of, the advantage of having a psychopathic mentality. For example, sales, right? If you've got strong levels of psychopathy, you can call 100 people in a day and not a single one returns your call, and you don't feel anything about it. And that was one of the points he made. If you can adopt that orientation when it comes to, say, sales, then you're going to potentially have a much more successful sales call, because you're not going to be, you're not going to be hurt by every perceived rejection. And I can imagine there are a whole multitude of reasons for why having certain psychopathic traits in the business context is valuable. And so I suppose my question to you is, do you think there's a role and value in having selfish leaders in organizations?
Before that, I want to challenge you on your wording. Valuable or useful?
Okay.
I think what you were describing before was useful. I don't know if it's valuable. Or I would question whether it's valuable. Because at the end of the day, a healthy, long-lasting customer relationship is also built on that the person who initially sold something to the customer want the customer well and do have consciousness, the ability to feel remorse. Yeah, so if it's the same person carrying out the sale throughout the whole value chain of sales, I would question whether it's valuable. It might be useful that you can call 100 people in a day and not feel anything. But I wouldn't like to have anybody to sell something to me where there's not consciousness, when they don't have the ability to feel remorse and have real empathy with what I need.
Well, I think the case being made here, and I may be misrepresenting it, but was that even without empathy, without a great deal of empathy, people could still be valuable to others. People can provide value. They can kind of guess what that person might need, and they can work off of positive signals and say, oh, even without having any empathy and no sense of they might be feeling good about something, they can still. And that's why often people, sociopaths and psychopaths, can be very socially successful, because they're very good at reading cues and figuring out what people want and giving them more of it. And so in that context, I would perhaps counter that selfish people can be valuable to others, even with a lack of empathy, and that they may have a role in businesses.
Yeah, but I would still call it useful and not valuable. And maybe it's a question of defining the words. And they are being used as useful in many businesses. A lot of people who have psychopathic traits or full-blown psychopaths are very successful in businesses because they're very useful. And for the same reasons that you are just mentioning. But they tend to destroy value rather than create it. And that's why I'm opposing calling it valuable. So at the end of the day, they will not create value. They will just harness their own nest and destroy things around them and people around them, but also values. But they can be efficient.
So you're not persuaded that organizational systems could be created that could accommodate the usefulness, let's use that, usefulness of sociopaths, psychopaths, in a way that ultimately isn't detrimental to the organization.
Yeah, I would keep them out of my business, and I would definitely recommend anybody else to do the same. I do think the ability to feel remorse is key in collaborating with other people. It feels very uncomfortable when you have a bad conscience or you feel remorse, but it's a healthy sign.
Mm.
And it's a mechanism that have been put in place in people. I don't know who put it in place, but it's a mechanism we have because it's keeping some kind of decency in the relationship. Unless you're being too hard on yourself, then it's the person feeling remorse or having bad conscience who are eating themselves, right? From the inside out. But I really, really would like to keep people who don't have the ability to feel remorse with an arm's length.
Mm.
And you can end up in a situation where you're in a family, you are work collaborating, you have to work with them because you're in a company where you don't hire all the people yourself, or you are in family. One of your family members have that trait. And then it's really about keeping distance to that person and managing them and managing yourself and being super attentive on the triggers and what happens. But I would never trust them. Never, ever. I would never share too much about myself.
Right.
And I would not advise anybody else to do that. It's about minimizing how much they know about you. It's about minimizing contact. It's about minimizing the impact they have. Sometimes I really question, like, why are they here? What would the world look like if no human beings had these traits? There would certainly be a couple of other presidents in the world than the ones we have now.
Yes.
And what would the world look like? Because this small percentage of human beings, they have a huge impact on the rest of humanity. They started wars. They're creating misery and traumas for masses of people at work, but also in many other contexts. I would prefer if they were not on the planet. And I certainly don't see a good reason to put them inside a business and exposing other people to collaboration with them.
Which has pretty dire consequences for that section of the population then.
Well, I don't know what to do about it, because it's not like I think we should kill them. That's not what I'm saying. I just sometimes, like, if we talk about existentialism, sometimes I'm really puzzled about why is it that they're there, and you can argue that they're useful. I would prefer without, really. I would prefer that people have a normal sense of consciousness, and I don't think it's worthwhile. I don't think we need them to make tough choices or a lot of calls, and it could be that they are contributing to their own survival, but I don't see how they're contributing to the well-being and health and survival of human race as such. Some of them are also making some really, really bad decisions on behalf of the human race in regards to our relationship with the planet, without consciousness, without the ability to feel remorse. They can destroy a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. But they must
I don't understand why
it must have persisted in society for a reason. They must have some social. I mean, for example, I understand that a lot of surgeons, high proportion of surgeons, have psychopathic traits or sociopathic traits, and that is advantage for them, right? Because they don't get squeamish on the operating table. They don't actually having less empathy for the patient can be advantageous if you're performing surgery, for example. That was something I read. So I can envisage circumstances where that set of traits may be, useful. And
Yeah, I can see your point about it being useful, but I would still prefer without.
Yeah, no, fair
And
enough.
they're very good. They're very good at self-preservation, and that's also, probably why they prevail throughout human history. And some say that there are more and more with those traits.
Yeah, I read something there that kids' empathy levels were going down. I think one theory was that because they were spending less time in face-to-face interactions, they weren't developing the same levels of empathy.
Yeah. I really think that values and respecting other people, and it's key in a healthy work life.
And you don't think it can be learned without a heart? Because that would be the other argument, right? That you can sort of socially train someone, even if they're not feeling it, to be pro-social and have constructive, relationships. Even
if they want it,
right.
if they choose to, if that person says, I might not have the ability to feel other people and have empathy, but I have decided that I will do my best and I will not let those traits govern my behavior. I will let another part of me govern my behavior. Yes, that can be done. But, you and I cannot make that person do that.
Sure.
They have to want it. And there are some who do want that. And that I respect. That's also a bold, courageous choice to make. That is brave. That is also a hero.
Yeah. So there is potentially redemption for those who
Certainly,
choose it.
there's a free choice in that sense. If that person becomes aware of it and makes a choice, then they can choose that. But first they have to become aware, and then they have to be able to see that there's another path. And that here we also find something where I am a little unhappy with how most psychiatrists describes this condition, because everybody writes you cannot change them, they cannot be changed. But if we don't give those people a hope, if they don't think, if everybody say you cannot change, how should they? How could they? We should give them some light ahead of the tunnel as well. And in the book, Martin, he doesn't change, but the real person who is behind Martin actually did, after all this happened, did reflect and made some choices and did not continue in the same path.
Ah, well, there we go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could see a little bit of light there. You will read that Caroline, the coach, she finds a way to make Martin interested in the process, finding it stimulating, challenging, curious. And through that, there came some little openings, and there were some cracks of light. And tapping into those little cracks of light, there behind all this, there is a hurted soul. Most of the people who have dark traits and who have that behavior, if you dive into their story, you're gonna cry. Seriously.
Yeah.
Most of them had really, 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 really tough things happening in their life. And behind all that, there's someone that can be reached if they want it.
Yeah.
And maybe just to a certain extent.
Yeah. But maybe to enough of an extent that they don't of course, we all just through being human are going to create some level of harm around us. We can't walk the earth as saints. But yeah, maybe they can minimize it to a great degree, right?
And I always say, going from terrible to bad, that is an achievement.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll be happy to work with people like that too, if they want it.
So does that mean we could modify your prescription a little then and say it's they can be in organizations if they've got a level of self-awareness and they're working on it and they're attempting to change? Or would you still say, yeah, but let's keep them out of organizations?
I would still say keep them out of the organization. Let them do something that fuels them in a different way than a large organization would, because then it becomes like a game. Then it's a play. Then it's like, how far can I push it? How far can I get? It's not a healthy environment for a person with those traits to be in. You rather want to put them in an environment where they can express that other part of themselves and be their best self. Could be doing something creative. Could be cooking for other people. It could be, and I know in the kitchen you also have to collaborate with other people, but like if you can do something in a setting where
there are solo chef type situations. Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's healthier. It's less tempting. And seeing how much can I push the boundary? How much can I? It's like a candy for a child.
It would be great actually to get you on a panel discussion with my previous guest. That would make for a fantastic debate. Anyhow, I know we've had a great conversation. I know you've got a hard stop, so it's been fun and deep as I expected, which was great. So again, for people who are interested in 12 tools for managing a selfish leader, if you're in a position where you too have somebody with these dark traits in your orbit, then look no further. There's some fantastic tools in here, very practical, very well laid out. So highly recommend the book. We'll put that as a link in the show description. And Josefine, anywhere else you would send people who are interested in your work?
Yes, you're more than welcome to go on my website, josephinecampbell.com. Josephine is spelled with an F, the Scandinavian way.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of free tools on my website that you can grab for use. There are lots of articles. I'm going to post this podcast along with the other podcasts. So there's a section with podcasts. And
awesome.
Feel free. And LinkedIn, of course. Yeah, because nice. I actually spend some time on LinkedIn and I enjoy engaging with people who I work with, people who have read my book, people who have a question. Feel free to reach out. Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Fun. I really, right. I have a true interest and care for the people. So, and the people I work with, the people who are interested in this work, and people who, anyone. Feel free to write me a question if you have one.
Wonderful. Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you once again. Fabulous conversation. Thank you for writing the book. I'm sure it's going to help a lot of people out there. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Richard. It's much appreciated.